All right. So we may start the press conference now. Let's start by the usual introduction. Right next to me is Augusta Gore, the co-writer of the film. On the other side of the table, we have Doug Mitchell, the producer of the film. This gentleman plays a genius genie, Idris Elba. Yeah. And the most wonderful narratologist that we have ever seen on screen, Tilda Swinton. And of course, Monsieur le réalisateur, George Miller. Yeah. If you don't mind, Monsieur Miller, I'm going to start with a question for you. A very simple question. Why did you want to tell this wonderful, wonderful fairy tale that is much more than just a fairy tale?
Well, first of all, I read a short story, Spite's Djinn in the Nightingale's Eye, and it just stuck with me because it was very rich in potential. So time went by and it stayed with me, so we wrote it, and then we eventually made the film.
Is that easy?
No, not that easy, but in a way it was, because the story was always strong, and it mainly kind of probed a lot of things that I think most of the stories we tell as human beings, all the big issues, seem to be encapsulated in this one relatively short story. So that's So basically, it sticks with you, and you eventually find yourself making it one day. And I'm very thankful for it.
All right, I'm going to open the floor for questioning. We have a lot of questions. So we have second row, this gentleman.
Yes, Mr. Miller, Robert from the Netherlands. Thank you for your film. The music plays an important part in this film as well. You've been working together with our Dutch hero, Tom Holkenborg, again. Yes. Can you elaborate a little on the collaboration? And are you guys going to do Mad Max Furiosa together as well?
Yes, on Mad Max Furiosa, we're already working on the score on that. But Tom, if you know Tom, he's really interesting as a composer, because also he's a polymath, and he is a teacher. He was my teacher, particularly about music. I'm not musical, and he was able to give me insights into that, and I think in return I was able to give him some insights into drama. And that resulted in the score that he wrote. But he's somebody who, on the one hand, is very rigorous intellectually, but that never diminishes his intuition. And I just love listening to the score. Every time we'd come to a scene where that music would play, even though there was I would want to play it through. Once I started hearing it, I couldn't stop. So. He wanted to be here, but he wasn't able to be here. So he missed a screening last night, which is a pity. Thank you.
I just want to tell you that yesterday on the Croisette, everybody was whistling the theme of the film. Oh. I heard like blood people singing it. We have a question from Rodrigo over there.
Hi, this is Rodrigo from Brazil. Question to Mr. Elba. I don't know if the word hero would be proper to be used here, but I think that your Djinn has a heroic dimension, like the griots of Africa, trying to protect the memory, poetry. What's this heroic dimension that you see in the Djinn? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, you know, I never considered the Djinn as a hero. Actually, I think he's quite a flawed spirit. As flawed in his, I guess, his longing. And as far as being a hero, I think he's far from that. But in the sense that, you know, when he meets Alethea, he is brave. He realizes that the normal procedure as a Djinn to grant wishes is not going to work here. So he begins to take bravery on in a heroic way, if you like, to sort of tell stories that he hasn't told before and face inner turmoil that he's never faced before. So I think maybe that is the most heroic thing he does.
Hi, it's Jason Gorber from Canada. Mr. Miller, congratulations on the film. Welcome back. This is a story about storytelling. It's narrative about narratology. I'm wondering if Idris and Tilda, you've worked on the biggest canvases and the small, intimate ones. If you could talk about, as performers, when we tell these stories, from you as performers, what the differences, the subtleties that you can get on the biggest screen, or some of the bigger performances that sometimes you can get on the smallest. And Mr. Miller, the same thing. When you're making a film like this, you are trying to tell the story of us watching your own film. I'm just wondering how you managed to not lose yourself within the artifice of storytelling and make sure that you're gifting us with something that actually works from the audience's perspective.
Ooh.
That's 3 questions.
Yeah.
3 wishes. Well, I mean, my province is not the small screen, but the biggest one possible. I'm proud to say. That's my flag, and I fly it. But I know that this screen, this big screen here, is possibly the most beautiful one on the planet, and we are so proud always to bring our work here and to have that sound system. That's the temple. And the thing about that big screen and other maybe smaller big screens is that you can see everything. And so as a performer, it's this portal to, it's a very forensic space, and the detail that one has to be aware of being picked up on a big screen. You know, you woe betide anybody who thinks that the camera ever lies. Working with someone like George, who, I mean, with this project, it was very interesting because I made a mistake with when George said, this is a little film. We're going to make a little film. It's not Mad Max, don't worry. It's going to be a little film. I was kind of hoping it was going to be Mad Max, but anyway. It's going to be a little chamber piece, a conversation between 2 beings, and it's not actually going to be big. It's huge, as you know. I mean, what I saw on that enormous screen last night was quite overwhelming. But what he manages to do is keep it small and keep it real. And so not only, I would suggest, in the scenes that he works with the Jinn and Alethea, which is so precise and so melodic and varied, and, you know, one's kind of noodling through an argument all the time, but also with these big set pieces. There's reality there with these extraordinary actors from all over the place bringing that reality. So as a performer, it doesn't matter whether it's a big old battle or whether it's a small conversation in a pair of tattling dressing gowns in a hotel room. It really doesn't matter. That needing to be anchored and needing to be authentic, that's the task. And working with George, who knows that better than almost anybody, is such a privilege and an honor.
Oh, Grace, thank you. Well, the very first, I think the best way to answer the question is the very first conversation I had with Idris was when he said, listen, I've read the script and I'd really like to do the film. He said, but I would love to shoot this backstories, the flashbacks first, so that when I'm actually in the hotel room telling Tilda, call her Alethea, telling Tilda that I've, to some extent, I have been through those experiences. And the second thing he said, if you remember, was that I would like to actually film me saying that, even if you don't use the picture, at least I'm telling somebody a story. I'm telling Tilda the story. And that, I think, goes to answer your question. That's basically how it happened. Up until that conversation, it never occurred to me. It's the most obvious thing to do now. And I think to the extent that that sort of works, the bouncing between the 2 story works, I think that's the main reason. So we didn't see you until we'd finished everything else. Yeah.
Just to echo, Tilda, I think from a performer's perspective, there's very little difference between, you know, a big scale movie and a small movie in terms of performance. However, there are some landscapes, realms, scenery that require slight amplification as a performer versus something that feels very real and real time. And, you know, calibrating that may be something that I pay attention to, but usually in terms of what our drive is as a performer, it's the same engine.
If I may follow up on this, the writing itself, I mean, as Jason said, it's a narrative about a narrative, and it's tell a story, and also it makes us live the story. Maybe, Augusta, you can answer about how you can write a narrative about a narrative, and how that plays in terms of dynamics.
That's a great question, thank you. How do you write a narrative about a narrative and then present it to people, which also continues the narrative, right? How did we do it? We talked endlessly. We did one of, I hesitate to say this, but one of the benefits of COVID was that when Tilda and Idris came to Sydney, Australia, they had to spend 2 weeks in quarantine. And so we had 2 weeks of uninterrupted rehearsal time with them over Zoom, and we just talked and talked and talked. And George and I, as we sat shoulder to shoulder writing the script, also spent years in conversation about the nature of storytelling, about how we make meaning in our lives through telling each other stories, through telling ourselves stories. And it was a beautiful experience, and in sharing with the audience now, that story will continue to unfold.
And Doug, did George try to make you believe that it was going to be a small movie? Doug?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Did George try to make you believe that it was going to be a small story, a small movie?
No. He said it was he knew that any film is like an engagement in some sort of massive way. It's like a war, he describes it, really. And turbulence like life is inescapable. So we had to... Idris had COVID, you know. And there was delays in making the film happen. You know, and it is... Nobody cares how big the film is. It's what ends up on the screen. And what we saw last night, tribute to everybody that's beside me here, I think it's a great film. And yeah, we survived the turbulence and got to the end of it. That's my answer.
All right, we got a question in the back of the room.
Hi, is this on? Yes, my name is Marcus. I work for One Press TV. First, I want to say it's great to have you here, and welcome to Cannes. I want to ask Idris Elba and Tilda Swinton, how did you come in contact with this project, and what is important for you when you pick your roles?
I don't pick roles. I pick people, and I always have, and it's really served me well. So if it ain't broke, no, don't fix it. I'm not changing it now. And I was in Cannes, I know exactly now, 5 years ago, because it was the last birthday for Cannes, 70th. And I was invited to the celebration lunch. And I was very shy, and I didn't know very many people there. And I sat down opposite someone I didn't recognize, and we just fell into a very beautiful conversation. And about 15 minutes in, I realized it was George Miller. And that was it. The die was cast. We just hung out the whole day. We sat together with Bong Joon-ho in the evening. That was a very good table. And we just became friends quite quickly, but quite, you know, deeply. And then about a year later, he sent me a script, and this was it. So, but then, of course, I had already met him through his films. I'm a sort of uber fan. I think that was one of the reasons it was so kind of tender to meet him in this rather beautiful way, because I didn't realize that this gentleman I was talking to was the creator of not only Mad Max, but Babe, of course, which was the first George Miller film I ever saw. I still say to my children, that'll do, Pig, whenever they've achieved anything.
Before Idris answers, I've got to say, that's the first time you've uttered a truth to me that I realised, that is, you picked your directors, they don't pick you. And I was really... I said that to someone, and they said, yes, that's true, and I don't want to embarrass you, Tilda, but I realised very early on that I joined that great club of directors with whom Tilda has worked not only once but several times. And I've had the first taste, but and there's a reason for that, and it's that comprehensively you approach the films not only as an actor but an artist and a filmmaker, and so I'm a nascent member of that club, and I just hope that the future sees us doing something like this again.
I've got witnesses.
It's out there.
So you're in Furiosa? No. We had a question by second row.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Idris, did you want to answer that?
Please.
I'll wait.
Sorry.
Well, just very quickly, Johnny Seal, who is an incredible DOP and has worked with George for many years, I have Johnny Seal's wife, Louise, to thank for meeting George, because George reminded me of this story. I was at the BAFTAs. I'm in my chair, and then I think there was an intermission, and then these two lovely ladies came over to me. One was Johnny Seal's wife, Louise, and Margie, your wife, and came over and said hello, and said, "Oh, we're with I think Mad Max was nominated at the time, right? Max was." Yeah. And said, "Oh, we're with George Miller, and he'd like to say hello." Over there was George Miller. I was like, "What?" So I walked over and said hi, and we talked. I didn't think he knew who I was, but anyway, we just spoke for a second. And then a year later, probably at around, my agent Roger calls me and says, "George Miller would like to talk to you." After I fainted and got back up off the floor, I, ended up talking to George, and that's when he introduced me to this project. So thanks, Louise.
Yes.
And in terms of roles, I tend to sort of think about. Someone told me the other day that I've done over 100 films now. I didn't know that. I was like, wow. But I can say that I'm thankful that I haven't played the same character twice. And that's sort of what drives me, is when I look at a role, I think about whether this is someone that's new, it's new to my palette, is it going to stretch me? And that's how I sort of choose what I'm going to do next.
My apologies for this, and lady, please.
Hi, Cynthia Carina from 3CR in Australia. Thanks so much for that film. It transported me. I really loved it. Question for Augusta and George. In writing the film, I really loved... not in writing, in viewing it, I really loved the whole supernatural and philosophy thing. So I was wondering what was going through your minds when you came up with something as dare I say, crazy? That's a wrong word, but as bizarre as that. I mean, do you ever see supernatural as a kid or anything like that yourself, or have you got any... I guess I'm wondering what's going through your minds as you're writing it.
Well, if I could answer, I think that most stories we tell are allegorical. That means they have a poetic dimension, meaning that they're open to interpretation depending on who's watching them. We watch films according to our own lived experience and worldview. And that's why I think fantasy stories lend themselves to dealing with much more complex things than, obviously, than say, a documentary or something more reality-based. So, obviously, being aware of that and being a storyteller, it's something constantly going on in your mind. And I think ultimately it was why I was really attracted to this story for the first place, why it wouldn't let us go. And then I got Gussie involved and then everybody else involved, and suddenly we're having these very conversations that you're alluding to. Stories are definitely there to enchant us in some way. Even the dark stories, even the stories that might seem rather dry, because, as you say, we're looking to be transported. We're looking to somehow I guess the conversations were always around those sort of things, but it always had to be rooted in reality. It had somehow to be connected with that. And that's why in the casting of this film, it was really, really important that to the extent that you wanted to be fanciful, you earned that right by being as somehow finding a way to be as grounded as possible. And just going back to casting, when we were writing it, I sort of had a good impression of most characters, of the characters, and when I met Tilda, and I had no idea what you were like, Tilda. I mean, I knew you from your films, but it was hard to figure out who you were from the films, which means that she's obviously a great actor. I'll try to make this short. But that lunch and that dinner here, I suddenly thought, oh my God, she is Alethea. So off we went a year later, but I had no idea who could play the Djinn. And if it wasn't for Louise and Margie saying, the only person we want to meet here, we're Australians, we've gone all the way over to the BAFTAs, and the only person we want to meet here is Idris Elba. And and luckily, if they had not done that, and I had not met you and gotten a strong sense of you, I would not have no idea who could play the Djinn. I honestly, to this day, couldn't name anybody. I'm sure there are a lot of people and a lot of suggestions. And part of that is that on the one hand, there is an element of you being very grounded, no matter how fanciful the performances are. That's the best way I could describe it.
Yeah. There's no other actors that can do that.
Yeah. Yes, thank you for your question. I'll just add that I think the film can be read on many levels, depending on what the audience feels like doing. On the one hand, it's about a narratologist who goes to Istanbul, meets a djinn, and he offers her 3 wishes in exchange for his freedom. But on the other hand, it's a conversation about the interplay between science and myth, between technology and magic, between the ideas of immortality and what it means to live a mortal life with love and desire and fear and all the things that we go through all the time. So I would just echo that, yes, sometimes the way that we reach a story is through allegory. And even, I'm not sure if any of you heard a little bit of it last night, but towards the end of the 3rd act, Alethea is teaching in a lecture theatre, and she's telling a story about truth and story, and how when we see truth, sometimes we turn away, but if you package it in brightly coloured clothing, and beautiful speech, and it becomes a story, then we actually see the way to the truth through that. So that was the interplay between. Well, it is based on a short story, and and the framing of that. It's very different, the film, from the novella. But of course, yes, the supernatural. I mean, would we consider the Djinn supernatural?
Way back when we actually went to AS Bayard. This was many years ago. And to ask for the rights of the story, she said, "Look, I've written quite a few of these stories. It was in an anthology of fairy tales that she'd written. Remember, she's a serious literary figure and a scholar herself, but she is one of those who's a big advocate for narrative in literature." And if you want to read anything that she wrote at the turn of the millennium, this is how far back it goes. She wrote for the New York Times when people were asked to comment on what they thought the most interesting music, for instance, or the most interesting art, or the most interesting stories were. She wrote on the 1001 Nights, and her article was called "Narrate or Die." So she is someone very, very strong on story. Anyway, she asked me, why did you pick this particular story? Because, I said, it just feels real. And she says, you know, that's because it is. Everything in this story is true, except for the jinn. She went to the hotel room. Even though when you read the story, it turns out she went to another hotel, but wished she'd gone to the Agatha Christie room. But she went to a conference. She met the equivalent people in this story. So it was her flight of fancy of what would happen. And I think that my hope is that some of that authenticity has seeped into the film. Yeah.
Gentleman over there.
Hi, I'm Alexander from Movie Scene, Sweden. A question to our wonderful actors and Mr. Miller. If you met a jinn and had 3 wishes that could come true, what would they be?
I'm not going to answer it.
Well, I'm going to use this answer. Like, the first wish will be, I wish I had a better answer for that very question. The second wish would be that the audience take away from this film the importance and the understanding that stories is we learn from stories, and that this film is actually quite an unconventional telling of a story. And I hope the wish would be that the audience understand that, watch it twice, 3 times, to make it their own story. And the third wish would be for an electric Ferrari.
Well, I sort of feel in George Miller we have met a jinn. Seriously. I mean, he says he's going to do something, and he does it. And it's usually... I mean, I was thinking about wishes. It feels like the most rational way to use one's wishes would be to think of things that you couldn't otherwise manage to find a way to get. So, yes, meeting George Miller, who says he's going to make a small film that covers 3,000 years, has kind of already been a box that's been ticked for me. I don't know. I mean, you might imagine Idris and I have been asked this question a little bit since we've been here, and I still feel like I wish I had prepared at least one answer. I don't know. Infinite wisdom amongst all members of the human and non-human race in perpetuity across the planet. That would be good. I don't know how else we're going to get that, but that would be a start. And a little bit more sleep.
It's an answer I can't answer, but it's a question I can't answer. But it would be to win the gold medal in the 100-meter dash in world record time, and that's my wish.
Yeah.
Is it going to happen?
We're going to make it happen.
Yeah, thank you.
Augusta, Doug, what are your wishes?
Yeah, I think like George and Idris and Tilda, it's difficult to wish, but I did wish way back when that we had the money to put this together in COVID, and I'm very, very grateful for the Australian government stepping in with their rebates, and Metropole, who are distributing it here, all the distributors that got together, MGM, I won't list them all, but that was indispensable. We were shooting the film supposedly in London, Istanbul, and Sydney, and that just evaporated as the world shut down. George, in his own, persistent, clever way, substituted the worlds that you see on the screen with visual effects. So although we all went to these various locations and picked the venues, we weren't able to shoot there. And it's a credit to the amount of work that you don't see under the tip of the iceberg that we saw last night that George has put into the film. And it's an extraordinary result. So yeah, I don't think that answers your question, but it certainly answers mine. Grateful to all the help that we got. Yeah.
Your turn, Augusta.
Well, if I learned anything co-writing this film with George, it's that wishing is a hazardous art and a cautionary tale, so I'm not even going to go there.
All right, gentleman in the white shirt.
Hello. Hello, this is Mohamed Alan from Algeria. I'm very honored to be here with a great actor, filmmaker, which is I like a lot. Actually, it was my same question of my friend, but it's another different way. My question is, if you have 3 wishes about to make the world better, to stop this war in this world, Dries, what do you wish to stop to make this world better? And Mr. Miller.
Well, the jinn himself says at the beginning when he offers 3 wishes, he says, first of all, you can't wish for endless wishes. Second of all, you can't wish for, I can't make you immortal. And thirdly, he said, I cannot end all suffering and sorrow. I'm only a jinn. And of course, we could make the wishes, but the whole point, I think, in making wishes is that they must be earned in some way. So it's one thing to want the turmoil and the chaos of life and that we're seeing all around. It's part of our human narrative. But it'd be one thing to wish it. It's another thing to effectively do something about it. So it's in actions, I would say. But I don't have the capacity to actually sit here in front of you and give you my thoughts on that sort of thing. I certainly have them, but it's really to see the actions. And I think going back to the heroic figures, I think the heroic figures do those sorts of things. They are the agents of change, but it requires their relinquishing of self-interest. That's the heroic gesture. And in a way that the more obvious troubles we see, it requires people to relinquish their self-interest. So if I could make a wish, it would be that. Relinquishing self-interest for the greater good. And you know, those people have managed to do that. They become mythological in that sense. So I hope that's some sort of answer.
Yeah, I'm going to just echo George. It's very difficult in this forum to sort of, come up with a satisfactory answer. But as Ghazi said, I think wishing is cautionary, So I'll step back.
All right, gentlemen, the brochure, if you don't mind standing, please stand.
Oh, sure, of course.
I'm sorry about that.
I'm just doing this for attention. Hi, it's Matt Donnelly from Variety. The question's for George and Augusta. I noticed in the beginning of the film, when Alethea arrives at the conference in Istanbul, one of the images in the presentation is of superheroes, Batman, Superman. I'm curious if the two of you think that our contemporary superhero storytelling, will it survive through the millennia and sort of represent the values of these great tales that you tell about in this film? And I realize you're flanked by 2 Marvel stars, but don't be intimidated.
Thank you, Matt.
Sorry, the question is, do you think they will endure?
Yes, our contemporary superhero storytelling, will that endure over many millennia?
Well, in a sense, they endure and have endured anyway. The one thing that you can be certain of, that they will change. They will morph into something else. It's obvious, and I think it's said in that lecture that the Marvel DC universe are basically the vestiges of the Greek and Norse and Roman mythologies, and there's a direct equivalence between each of those characters, and so we're going through an era, which I think is where we're expressing through moving image narrative these stories. They're echoes of the past, but they are adjusted to have meaning to us. And it's no accident that that they are so popular, and the people who make those films are very sincere. And I don't think they would be so popular if they weren't made with that degree of sincerity. But so 10, 20, 30 years' time, they'll be different. But in a sense, they'll be the same sort of stories. I'm not the one who's really saying that. The person who shed most light on that, of course, was Joseph Campbell. And it will always be thus. No matter what happens to us as humankind, there will be those form of stories adapted to the times. Yeah?
I just want to add something that I'm just thinking about story, that the consistent, as Joseph Campbell, says so clearly, the persistent evolution and continuation and survival and dissemination of ancient myths and tropes is not an issue. The thing about story is that the thing that's dangerous about story is when you have one story. Only one story, and one of the things that we're all very keenly aware of, you in particular, you journalists, are so aware of, and us artists too, but particularly you, is how dangerous only one story is. And it's on you, and to a certain extent us, but it's really on you to keep it coming, keep it varied, keep it multifarious, keep it contradictory, keep it challenging, because we know so clearly now, particularly in the last few months, that one story is a really dangerous thing. And it is possible, when people can't hear any other stories, that things really go down the tubes very, very fast and may close everything down. So it's keeping people's ears open, keeping their ears curious to hear something new, a new perspective, a new truth even. But it's just that one story that we have to get away from. And it feels very apposite to make this film now about a variety of angles, even the debate about whether or not it involves supernatural forces or not. I'm not sure it does. I think it might be completely real, this story. Somebody might. It's that feeling of, it's that feeling of keeping it open and keeping our ears open and our hearts open that's really important.
Last question over here.
I'm lucky then. Okay, congratulations in your film, of course. I just feel now that I lost my Santa Claus all over again, my faith in Santa Claus. But so I have two questions. First, for George or the writer, whoever want to answer about on the question. To mix these fantasy stories that we keep hearing in our childhood with these very philosophical thoughts in our today, in our current life, being tend to be individuals, content, and we don't really. We are not more dreamers than the generations before, if I can say this. So mixing this philosophical thoughts with these fantasies, how this idea came from scratch. And another question for the actors, juggling between these rules, between doing a fantasy role and the very realistic side of the persons. How did you manage to do it, and how you prepare to juggle between these two? Thank you.
Who wants to start?
Trying to get to the core of your question. As I said before, and I do believe this, that stories are constant in humankind. What happens is the circumstance in which those stories are told. And that's always changing. I mean, there's no question in all cultures that tell stories, their stories are changing. Otherwise, they become rigid and hold-fast. And basically, that's not conducive to the survival of the culture. Look, it just occurred to me when you asked about the supernatural. The way that this story explains it is that it's all of our stories are always changing according to our knowledge at the time, and that's made really, really clear that the jinn himself, we point out, basically can't survive in this world because he is bombarded by the very matter of which he is made, electromagnetism, which Zofia discovers. And in this world right now, so many of you are holding phones to record this. I can pick up my phone and I can basically coax out of the air, as we say, any bit of information that's out there. That's a kind of a magical thing. If I try to explain that to my grandfather, he would think I was that would be a magical time, and so on, going all the way back to the past. And no doubt, in 30, 40, 50 years, there are things that will be indistinguishable from magic that we could not have imagined, or say a century from now. That's always the way we are as human beings. I was very, without going on to a long thing about this, I was very interested to read how during the pandemic we as humans dealt with the plague back centuries before without any idea of germ theory. There was no knowledge of that. Now even every little kid basically knows about it. So it had to be done through narratives, through stories that told you how to be careful, even though they were basically intuited. So does that in any way help answer your question? Yeah, thank you.
And Tilda Idris, second part of the question about jumping from fantasy to reality.
Oh, all films are fantasies.
It's true.
They are.
This film has, for me, I made 2 films in this film, and if to your point, the reality of my character is that he finds himself in this predicament in the present day, in this hotel room with Alethea. And the fantasy, if you like, is where the stories that he tells takes the audience in flashback. And to some degree, there is a sense of heightened reality when you look at Sheba's world, Sheba and these fantastical creatures and Solomon's beautiful instrument. There's a fantastical nature of that. But it's all his reality. It's all part of his reality. So in terms of from a performer's perspective, again, as Tilda said, all films are fantasy. For me, all of that is real for the jinn. It's all very real. And for me, it's also real as a performance piece. I'm not really jumping in between one or the other. But one of the things that was, interesting when George and I were talking about the jinn, we really wanted to avoid any tropes of jinns or genies, even though the construct is what it is, and down to how he looks and talks. He puts on the bathrobe. I mean, this is the reality of that jinn, and it was very on purpose that we tried to make a jinn that wants to be human as possible in a real situation. So here he is telling these fantastical stories in a bedroom, in a hotel room, wearing a robe. You couldn't get any more real and unfantasy-like than that, but then transporting the audience into these fantastical worlds, is the journey. I hope that sort of answers your question,
All right. Thank you very much, Doug Mitchell, Tilda Swinton, George Miller, Idris Elba, and Augusta Gore. Thank you.